It seems appropriate that the Valkyria Chronicles game subtitled The Unrecorded Chronicles is the only game in the series that has not been localized for the West, but it is also quite a shame because it is a very good game. It has possibly the best story in series history, along with some gameplay innovations that breathe new life into the series. Some fans even claim it is the best game in the series, and while I don't agree, and I'll get into the reasons why in this video, it is undeniably a great gaming experience that unfortunately many people have missed out on because of its lack of localization and release on a dying, now dead, console. Valkyria Chronicles 3 is a tactical JRPG in the Valkyria Chronicles series, which I have highlighted in videos on the first and fourth games on this channel. The franchise is a unique blend of turn-based combat with third-person shooter, and story and setting-wise is based in a fictionalized Europe, using both world wars as the main inspiration for its conflict. The game was developed by Sega and Mediavision. Valkyria Chronicles 3 was released in Japan in 2011 for the PSP. However, due to diminishing sales for Valkyria Chronicles 2 and 3, and the demise of the PSP in the West, it never got localized. That didn't stop people playing it though, and it was critically praised both in Japan and the West. It was hailed for the improvements made from the second game, which also was a PSP exclusive, but had been localized. The way I was able to play it, given my Japanese is very limited to the point of almost not existing, is through a fan translation compatible with the expanded edition, which is also the experience I recommend for anyone trying to play it in English. What made this game so popular though, despite that lack of Western release? I believe the main reason lies in the story of VC3. Like the first two games of the series, the third takes place in the country of Gallia during the invasion of the Empire. It also runs concurrently with the first and fourth games and has cameos with characters from the first and second games as well. The game follows Squad 422, otherwise known as the Nameless. They are given this name because their battles, accomplishments, and even names are unrecorded, enabling them to take on certain subtle and delicate tasks. Since no one in their right mind would choose this life for themselves, the squad is actually a penal squad made up of a motley assortment of criminals and general wrongdoers. The main character, Kurt Irving, becomes one of them when he's accused of treason, and his goal becomes to restore his good name and gain amnesty, the reward promised to the Nameless if they carry out their tasks. The other main characters are two women on the squad, Briella and Income. Briella is nicknamed the Angel of Death for her fortune, or misfortune, of being the only survivor from multiple destroyed squads. Imka is a Darkson, a highly persecuted group, see Jewish parallel consistent with World War II themes, and is terse and mysterious. Of all the members of the squad, Imka has been part of the Nameless for the longest, and the reason as to why has yet to be revealed. Together, this squad takes on dangerous missions and discovers they have a rival counterpart on the Empire's side, Calamity Raven, a squad comprised of only Darksons, which, considering the Empire's persecution of the Darkson people, is quite surprising. The Nameless uncover many secrets during their campaign, which, considering their own secret nature, is perhaps unsurprising. The story is darker than any of the previous or following games thus far, dealing with lots of subjects such as war crimes and of course the continued theme of Darkson persecution. With the intriguing premise, I was already hooked, and the game rewarded my eager consumption with a strong storyline with great characters on both sides and a twisting narrative that kept me on my toes. Some moments were predictable, but even when that happened, the payoffs and character moments made the story well worth it. Speaking of the characters, the investment in the lives of the characters kept me going throughout the game, not just the main three, but the whole squad. This game has a smaller cast compared to the previous games in the series I played, and that actually served to its benefit because now the characters could appear in cutscenes and moments outside of battle. In the other games, since they have large casts, it meant typically that only the 4 or 5 so-called main characters had any screen time outside of battle. A lot of the Nameless, though, featured throughout the story, making the squad feel like a cohesive unit in a way Squad 7 and Squad E did not. In addition, VC3 has Fragments, the precursor to the squad stories that fleshed out the supporting cast in the fourth game. These were great side stories to help us learn more about the members of the Nameless and how they got the honor of joining the Nameless. All of these factors help to make this small group of soldiers feel very lively and familiar, even if you only use certain characters in battle like I do. To make this work, however, Valkyria Chronicles 3 does not have the permadeath mechanic seen in the first and fourth games, instead having characters retreat until the next battle if they fall and are not revived. The exclusion of permadeath was a wise decision in my opinion, especially given the gameplay itself. On the surface, there seems little that has changed gameplay-wise for this entry in the series, but not too deep below said surface, there are significant changes. Some were made necessary by the limited capacities of the console which the game was developed for, but others were large structural changes to the franchise, shaking up the formula. As I mentioned before, the Valkyria Chronicles series has a unique blend of turn-based battles and third-person shooter called the Blitz system. You get command points to move your units around the battlefield, their range of movement determined by their action points, or you can use the command points to give orders that grant bonuses to your units. And once your turn ends, the enemy turn begins, where they can do the same actions. Your characters are usually not passive during the enemy's turn, as they can do interception fire to take down approaching enemies. The enemies do likewise on the player's turn. Most of the missions have fairly standard goals: kill all enemies, capture certain bases, destroy or protect an object, and have a unit reach a certain point on the battlefield. The game keeps these missions varied enough so it doesn't feel like you're always playing the same strategy to win every battle. You get rewards from the battle based on certain factors, but mostly relying on how many turns it took you to complete the objective. So the game values speed above all else to its detriment in certain cases. The rewards are used to upgrade your army, which I'll get into in the management section. This basic structure is universal for the whole series, but what makes Valkyria Chronicles 3 unique? To answer that question, we first start with the classes your units can be. The standard units return, such as Scout, Shock Trooper, Lancer, Engineer, and Sniper. As a quick summary of what those classes do, Scouts have high movement and are accurate shooters, Shock Troopers have heavy damage output, Lancers specialize in taking down armored targets, Engineers can repair tanks and heal units, and Snipers have long range. The classes added on to those 5 are Armored Techs, Gunners, and Fencers. Medics are also a class, but they are functionally the same as Engineers, so I won't go into them. Armored Techs have high armor and are specifically good at destroying boxes. It makes sense in context. Gunners are good defense units with their strong interception fire, but their spread attacks are fairly useless in offense. And Fencers are melee units that have pretty good damage output. While each class does have its use, I found myself sticking with the standard classes for the vast majority of the time. One major difference with classes, though, for the third game is the ability to change classes. So while I never got any base class snipers in my squad, I was able to change the character Surge to a sniper, and he surged in use the rest of the game. No, I won't apologize for that pun. Certain characters have affinities for certain classes, though, that grant them stat bonuses, something to keep in mind before going crazy with the mechanic. The other character-specific distinction in battle are the potentials that give bonuses or penalties given certain situations in-game. These serve as a nice way to distinguish between the soldiers and usually connect to the character's background or personality. The friendly and outgoing Amy, for instance, has a potential called loneliness that it negatively affects her if she wanders too far away from her squad. For a positive example, Briella, who has strong protective instincts for the squad, gains bonuses after passing certain members of the squad she has an affinity for. Each character has certain other members they are friendly with, and usually their presence helps trigger the positive potentials more often. After completing the character-specific fragments as well, some negative potentials can change to a positive trait, a useful way of showing character growth and rewarding players for completing the fragments. In addition, Kurt, Briella, and Imka have special abilities granted over the course of the game that can be used in battle, consuming command points and special power points. These powers can turn the tide of battle if used effectively. As always, in addition to the foot soldiers, the Nameless have a tank that wheels out for battle. The tank has armor-piercing rounds, good for taking down other tanks, mortars for splash damage, and a good old machine gun for individual foot soldiers. At least in its standard format. In-game, you can change what form your tank takes into each battle, ranging from the high movement but weak defense armored personnel carrier to the beefy but limited movement-wise heavy tanks. This is certainly helpful to gain certain advantages in specific missions, although that might be something to take advantage of in a second run, or if you have a guide, since you don't know what the enemy will throw at you when you first boot up a mission. Despite this plethora of options to pick from, the enemy has all of them and more. Well, except armored tech, but honestly, they wouldn't do much on the battlefield for the enemies. The biggest additional enemy class, though, is the heavy armor or Gatling soldier. They are a menace to civilized society and especially to the player, having unbelievable anti-infantry and anti-armor powers. They can rip through the toughest tank and even have impressively long range, and this fit with an unfortunate critique I have of the gameplay. To make the game more difficult, the developers gave almost game-breaking powers to the enemy, including, but not limited to, reviving dead soldiers, summoning 5 reinforcements for the price of 1 command point, teleporting bosses, and other such frustrations. The other games in the series had very balanced combat because the enemy and the player were given pretty much the same tools to work with during battles. From the heavy armor to the ridiculous orders, Valkyria Chronicles 3's gameplay favored the enemies in ways no other game in the series has, which was a huge frustration to me at times. I overcame these difficulties though, and maybe the game is perfectly balanced and I'm just bad at it. Who knows? The maps are another point of change, and also lack of change, but I'm focusing on the change first. Now the missions are split up into separate maps that you navigate between using the bases that connect between areas. This change is completely due to the limited power of the PSP as a console, and while annoying to deal with at times, becomes tolerable as you grow accustomed to it. The map design in general is fine, but wait, is that the same map as the last mission? And that one is just a direct copy from the first game. Yes, unfortunately the game is not that varied when it comes to maps. Taking maps from the first game makes sense, considering this game takes place at the same time and sometimes in the same locations as the first game. Reusing the same maps over and over and over though? Less understandable, beyond the developers trying to cut down on their budget. Honestly, it didn't bother me as much as I thought it might, but then again I also wasn't bothered by the level design of Shadows of Valentia, so I might just be more willing to endure bad or repetitive level design than the average player. The character progression also will surprise veterans of the series because the previous games have told their story in a book style with chapters leading up to usually one particular battle. For Valkyria Chronicles 3, the scenes setting up each chapter play more like a documentary, which I find appropriate given the undercover exploits of the Nameless. Once you've reached the menu where you select missions though, they proceed on a military-style map, with each of the 20 chapters having 2 to 3 story missions and 1 or 2 side missions to engage with. This makes the third game the longest to finish of any game in the series, so long as you play the way I do and complete side missions as well as main missions. I recommend doing so for experience and money purposes, but also occasionally completing side missions will give advantages in regular missions, such as taking away bombardment. In between missions, there are little movies to view, mostly about the Nameless, but also about the Gallian Regular Army, Calamity Raven, and the Empire. This is standard for the series as well, and matches the other games in quality as well. While on this map, you can also call up the menu to visit the base camp to do some management of your squad. Management-wise, the game proceeds in much the same fashion as the previous games. There is a base camp where you allocate experience, purchase new weapons, view character profiles and stats, and read news articles. Mostly the same until you get to the experience allocation. In prior games in the series, experience was portioned by class. In this game, they are portioned by stats to upgrade. Each level improves everyone on the squad. However, this does not mean that the stats for all the characters are the same. Through battle, characters can also level up to veteran or elite status and get boosts when those happen. For the most part though, you can plug in any character into battle and their performance would be similar. Potentials notwithstanding, which are now adjustable in a master table, which honestly I never even used since it seemed intimidating. The management is solid and a nice way to progress your team without risking total devastation if some characters aren't able to fight. Art style wise, the game again uses the Canvas engine that produces gorgeous watercolor style art. Unfortunately, due to the PSP's limitations, the graphics aren't as impressive as for the main console games, but they still shine in their own way. Although cutscenes are similarly limited due to console limitations and, I suspect, a desire to cut down on the production budget, despite that, the visuals we do see are of good quality. It's honestly impressive the game looks as good as it does given all the factors weighing it down. Musically, the game's soundtrack strikes a different chord than the other games in the series, and I think this musical shift matches the tonal shift of the story extremely well. The soundtrack, starting with the main theme, tends to evoke more of a renegade, outside-the-law feeling, which matches the tasks the squad is given to complete. It's far more reliant on the guitar in place of the triumphant battle horns and trumpets from other VC soundtracks, not that the horns are gone. This unique quality makes it an extremely distinctive soundtrack compared to the second and fourth games especially. Before I summarize my feelings on the game, I do need to extend a huge thank you to the Gallian Liberation Front group that translated the game into English. It is an impressive endeavor to do a fan translation of any game, and while the translation is certainly not perfect, the mere fact that I can play and understand the game at all is one of my favorite aspects of the modern technological era. I know there are those who fear that a rough translation will make the game a slog to get through, but rest assured, while there are occasionally awkward typos and formatting that doesn't quite fit text boxes, this translation is not just readable, but also enjoyable, and for that, you now know who to thank. Valkyria Chronicles 3 is a grand triumph as a game, given the challenges it was forced to face in development. The story is refreshing for tackling difficult subject matter and for breaking the narrative norms of the series thus far. The characters' believable cohesion as a group and many likable aspects only adds to the investment in the story. The gameplay is flawed, with overly challenging and repetitive missions, but it retains enough of the structure that made this series such a joy to strategize and battle in, from the variety of classes and potentials to the satisfaction of a plan coming together to defeat tough foes. The art, while limited from the more popular entries in the series, maintains its charm even on an underpowered console, and the music is a delight to listen to. It is truly a hidden gem of a game that is a true pleasure to experience and play, and I hope someday it gets a remake, a localization, and the attention it deserves. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it entertaining and informative. If you did, leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And as always, have a great day and happy gaming.